Welcome to the latest episode of the Northern Spin podcast, and we're recording this on Monday as history is made, as Andy Burnham has just given his first speech outside 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister of the UK. It was a moment most of us will never forget. Before all that, I would like to thank our sponsors, Sancus Lending UK. Sancus Lending UK is a real estate lender headquartered in Manchester and led by Andrew Charnley, who is Managing Director and recently appointed Chief Executive of AIM-listed Sancus Lending Group. Sancus specialises in providing short-term financing solutions to property entrepreneurs and developers throughout the UK. Northern Spin is a political podcast that gives you a voice in the North. And my name is Chris Maguire, Executive Editor of Business Cloud, and I'm joined by Frank McKenna, Chief Executive and Group Chairman of Downtown in Business. Frank, we've ripped up the running order for today's podcast. We're recording this at just after 1 o'clock on Monday. We've just heard Andy Burnham's first speech as the Prime Minister outside 10 Downing Street. Tell us how you feel.
Well, the first thing I'd say is, isn't it good to see a Prime Minister with a smile on his face and not looking at notes, making a speech very naturally, off the cuff, talking about the issues that clearly he's prioritised. No surprise to me that he's mentioned council housing, which is, of course, something he's brought up on a number of occasions during the past couple of weeks. The point that he made about sorting out homelessness and rough sleeping, something, of course, we're very aware of how close that issue is to his heart here in Greater Manchester. And then I think welfare reform being linked to defence spending was a clever thing to do as well, because it's signalling to his Parliamentary Labour Party that there are going to be some tough choices ahead. But as he said, he wants to make those welfare reforms in a sustainable way to support people back into work and to make sure that people can meet their ambitions and personal aspirations. So a really good speech to start his premiership. As he said there, you know, the fourth Prime Minister in the last 5 years, the seventh in the last decade. And so he recognises that he has got a big challenge ahead, but what he's promising is for a different type of politics, a different approach, and hopefully he can deliver very quickly, because he's going to need to, on some of those pressing issues, not least the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, I agree with 100% of what you said there. I think it's fascinating because people have asked us, what's Andy Burnham like? People in the South, what's Andy Burnham like? And what you say is he's great with people, he's charismatic. Now, he gave a speech there. He didn't have a lectern. That lectern has now been ditched until the next Prime Minister, which hopefully won't be for a few years yet. He had no notes. We saw the videos and the images and the footage outside 10 Downing Street. There didn't appear to be any auto cues. That was a speech that came from the heart, built up through 30, 40 years of something he passionately believes in as well. I thought he got the pitch just right. This was about hope, about aspiration, but it wasn't about, this jubilation and tub thumping. He recognises the fact that we've had too many prime ministers. There has been too much said. I thought that the wording of what he said and how he said it as well, the optics were just brilliant. I will give this my all. I ask you to pull with me. That is to say this isn't going to be easy, but I'm going to give you everything I've got. The fact that his first instruction is going to be to end rough sleeping. This is a guy, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, gave 15% of his salary away to tackle rough sleeping in Manchester. He couldn't eradicate it completely, but he certainly made it a lot better. And he's got the centre stage now. He's been given the keys to 10 Downing Street, and he's putting that front and centre of what he wants to do. We will help people live well. I mean, there's a message there in terms of the welfare situation that he's got. He doesn't want Labour to be seen as the party for welfare. He wants it to be seen as a party for workers. But he recognises he's walking a political tightrope as well. I mean, for a short speech, it's incredible how many notes I've made. Obviously, there's a few things that he talks about, like circuit breaker, which is referred to before. I was just looking on the social media, on his social media, and like on his X account, he said, "What's my first speech as Prime Minister?" There's this. He recognises the value of the social media that sits behind what he's doing. He spoke about a 10-year plan, so he doesn't see this as a 3-year circuit breaker. Yes, he's going to get stuff done straight away, but he sees this as another term. So he's got a lot of work to do as well. We've spoken about this before, and he's spoken about it, hope. Right, if you watch that as somebody who doesn't know Andy Burnham, let's try and step away from it. What do you think when you look at that, and when you hear Andy Burnham speak to you as a Prime Minister of the UK? I think you think hope, don't you?
You do. I think also what was, I think, distinctive from the previous two people who've been in that job was he looks comfortable in his own skin. He looks as though it's a job that he's going to enjoy, that he relishes. It's obviously something that he's been planning for some considerable time now. So he will have some key priorities and a plan in his head. And the 10-year strategy makes sense because some of the issues that the country has to deal with certainly require long-term solutions. But what he also acknowledged is the fact that there's going to be some need for quick solutions to the pressures that people feel out there. And he's got to start to give people that thing that he's spoken about very quickly, and that is hope. They've got to start to see that there is a change of direction. There's a change of culture from the job, from the government. The ability, I think, or at least his desire to work with other political parties, voices from other political tribes. I think that's going to be challenging, but I think it's one he's absolutely right to flag. Because if we are to meet some of those longer term challenges and some of the things I know Andy Burnham is passionate about, not least social care, it will require a conversation with other political parties, a longer term plan, and a mature approach to issues such as that, which don't have simple, quick answers to. We do need, as he's rightly said, to bring people together. And if we're going to succeed as a country, and if we're going to tackle some of those real big issues, then it will need cross-party support. The key thing, though, I'll come back to, is the fact that those two things he linked together in a sense: welfare reform and spending, and defence. An acknowledgement once again that some of the defence ministers who resigned just before Starmer went were absolutely right in saying that we do need to start spending more money on defence and security of this country, and an acknowledgement too that the recent reports from Alan Milburn and Pat McFadden on young people being out of work and Pat McFadden's welfare reform propositions are going to be high on his agenda as well.
I think this was the moment where the King of the North died, genuinely, because this wasn't about the North. This was about a Prime Minister who was talking to the whole of the UK as well. If people want to know what sort of Prime Minister he'll start off as and what the early days of his term as his tenure will be, it will be the opposite of what Keir Starmer did. So it's fascinating, and we've watched today unfold, and there's been more excitement today than there was in the World Cup final yesterday between Argentina, who seemed to forget that they were playing a game of football, and don't even start me about the halftime. And I quote, entertainment loosely. What was all that about? But what you saw Keir Starmer give a speech, a pretty typical Keir Starmer speech, which was wooden. It was sincere, but it was wooden. It was about, look at all my achievements, etc., 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 and I love my wife, right? What you heard there, I love my wife. I don't feel the need to say it all the time. What you heard there from Burnham was a pragmatic view of a politician who has clearly coveted his job for a long time. He wants to change the country, and he can only do that from 10 Downing Street. And it was but it wasn't a speech of hope with no substance. So Burnham says he'll start laying out plans to give people more breathing space on the cost of living starting tomorrow, Tuesday. The Prime Minister said he will put young people into work by changing the education system, with more support being available for mental health support. Now, obviously, the MBAC, the baccalaureate, was something he pushed heavily in Greater Manchester. He recognised that putting people into universities wasn't right for everybody. He wanted vocational training. He wanted to teach people the sort of skills they needed to get a job. We talk about the fact there are 1 million young people, NEETs as they're called, out of work. And yet we've got other areas of the economy where we are so short of staff and we are so short of the skills that we need. And he recognises there needs to be this address this, tackling this imbalance as well. He said that more council homes, which you've just touched upon, will be built as the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down. Now, I remember, because I'm old enough, Ed Miliband giving a speech as the leader of the Labour Party and deciding he wasn't going to do it with notes and he wasn't going to do it with with cues. He wasn't going to do it with prompts. He just gave it, and he gave a really good speech, but he forgot huge swathes of it. Now, Andy Burnham gave a speech. I don't know how long it was, but let's say it was 6 minutes. It wasn't a long speech, was it? It wasn't 7 minutes as well, but he gave it without notes. And as far as I can tell, when he said he was taken away with one hand, he was given with the other, or vice versa. I mean, how would you? You're a Labour man, right? How would Conservatives, how would non-Labour people listen to that? What's your view?
Well, I think if I was Kemi Badenoch, I'd be concerned that she's going to be up against a far more astute political opponent than she's faced over the past couple of years in Keir Starmer. Kemi Badenoch, I think, has performed relatively well in recent months and certainly has got the best of Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. She's going to be looking at Burnham as an entirely different personality and character and thinking, I'm going to have to up my game here, because he is a far more natural and authentic communicator than Keir Starmer was. In terms of the substance of the speech, I think he's already, even without mentioning this within the words that he's just given on 10 Downing Street, stolen the Conservative criticism of not drilling in the North Sea. He's now signalled that he's prepared to spend more money on defence and security, and he's signalled to his own backbenchers, but also to the country, that he thinks we need to reform welfare on the basis that we need to support people's aspirations, ambitions, and get them back into work. I think the other thing he did cleverly there, without actually mentioning the word devolution, was lean in to that key policy objective that he has. Because if you look at the skills shortages that we have, if you look at building council homes, as he's talked about, then the people who are going to be able to help and support that particular agenda are regional mayors and local government leaders, because the education system in this country is absolutely broken. And as you rightly point out, Chris, one of the reasons why we've got skills shortages, gaps in the labour market, is because we've had this drive to university education, but on the basis of that, we've really neglected further education, FE institutions, apprenticeships, and I think that we'll see over the next 12 months or so a big push into devolved authorities to be able to actually support young people in a far more effective way than has been the case thus far.
One of the things about Andy Burnham that I've always noticed is he values optics. He gets optics. He gets the way that things look, and he wants to project this message of hope as well. But he's also recognizing the fact that he's talking beyond his own base. So, if you haven't seen, to our listeners and viewers on Northern Spin, him deliver the speech, right? Downing Street was awash. I went to see Harry Styles recently. It looked like that, in the sense that it was, they were 6 deep. The supporters were 6 deep. Incidentally, I'm not comparing Andy Burnham with Harry Styles, but the point is there was an element of it just felt different.
It was quite joyous, wasn't it?
Quite joyous.
And the faces in the crowd were, if I can say this, they looked as though they were optimistic. They were enthusiastic in a way that perhaps we didn't see under the previous Prime Minister.
Steve Rotherham, the Metro Mayor for Liverpool, he was there with his grandchild. I listened to an interview that he gave recently on the BBC, and he said that would he take a 4th term? He said having a grandchild changes your perspectives as well. He was there front and centre. Andy Burnham stopped to speak to him. Touched the head of his grandchild. It just felt different.
Human.
It just felt human, yeah.
And I think that, the important thing sometimes is to remind people that politicians are human beings. And I was delighted to see Steve Rotherham there with his grandchild. Steve will have absolutely loved that moment. And it was a human touch to what obviously is a very significant historical moment for the country and for Andy Burnham himself. It was also great to see my old mate Peter Reid there, former Everton and England legend, of course. So lovely to see, as you say, so many smiling faces, so much enthusiasm. But what Andy Burnham will be absolutely conscious of is that the hard work starts now.
Yeah.
From this minute onwards, he's going to start to take really tough decisions, and he's going to start to disappoint some people as well. So he's made his speech, he's got off to a great start. He's, I think, put across some key messages, objectives, and the sort of plan that he wants to set out for not just himself, but his party, which has been lacking in direction. And I think lacking in an ability to get a message and a narrative across to the country as to what they want to do. I think undoubtedly what you've heard today is a prime minister that does have some ideas, does have a plan, and does want to start getting on with the job immediately. And as he said himself, first thing he was going to do was issue some instructions to start tackling that issue that he's passionate about, which is rough sleeping. Be interesting to hear what are the sort of things he's going to come out with as far as that particular thing is concerned. But as I say, the hard work starts now. We know he's charismatic. We know he's enthusiastic. We know he can give that feel good factor to his party and hopefully to the wider country as well. But those challenges remain the same. And what he's got to do now is begin to convince people that he's got the ideas that can begin to come up with solutions to those challenges.
His power right now is the highest it'll ever be. His popularity is higher than it'll ever be. It can only go one way, really. But if you look at some of the things that he said, so when he became the Labour leader on Friday, he identified 5 of his key priorities. So number 1, eradicating Labour's insidious briefing culture, which is something we've spoken about on the Northern Spin podcast. Now, as we record this episode of Northern Spin, we know that James Timpson, the prisons minister, has resigned. We know James Timpson, and he's a great guy. He's a businessman, first and foremost, but he's passionate about giving ex-offenders a second chance as well. We don't know what the backstory is. He may just decide after 2 years it's the right time for a change. We don't know what the look of his cabinet is yet, because Andy Burnham's not told anybody, and he's got a really tight inner circle of people. So we can't speculate on who that might be, but we might see some names drop while we're recording this podcast as well. How does he eradicate Labour's insidious briefing culture when he has to make decisions which are going to put a lot of noses out of joint?
I think it's going to be difficult for him to stop it entirely, but what he can do is lead by example. One of the big criticisms of Keir Starmer's number 10 was that his staff were often out briefing against cabinet colleagues or other members of parliament, members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So if you're briefing against your colleagues as the Prime Minister or a spokesman for the Prime Minister, then inevitably that's going to lead others to think, well, if the Prime Minister and his office are doing it, then I can too. So I would expect Andy Burnham to bring a different culture, a different style into 10 Downing Street. He doesn't enjoy the gossip and the tittle-tattle that often surrounds Westminster politics. He's often talked about the Westminster Buddle and how he actually doesn't like that way of doing politics. So you would expect that, as I say, leading from the front as far as that is concerned. But, you know, the combination of frustrated MPs and hungry journalists will mean that there's always going to be an element of briefing. What you would hope is that Andy Burnham is being able to set an agenda, set the narrative, and get on the front foot so that instead of the newspapers and media being filled with gossip, tittle-tattle, and people trying to settle old scores, they'll be talking about what Andy Burnham and his government are actually delivering and doing.
So the reason I say this story is moving at a pace is, and the reason we've ripped up the script, literally ripped up the script, is we want to be as current as we can. But in terms of what his priorities are likely to be, he's already identified some there. He spoke about doing politics differently. I think we saw that just in terms of his speech. He's talking about fixing the big things that politics has neglected. He's spoken about council houses. He's spoken about rough sleeping as well. These are things that have been ingrained in him from a very early age as well. More public ownership. We would expect to see more industries brought under public ownership, such as some of these water companies as well. And that's going to put him at odds with some people. You said on this episode, and I don't want to say, Frank, it's down to you, on a previous episode than the Northern Spin, you said that he has to ditch like the moniker of the King of the North because he needs to appeal to everybody. He said, I'll be a leader for the North, the South, the East, the West, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. You know, that didn't stop him when he gave his speech a couple of weeks ago outlining his vision. choosing the People's History Museum in Manchester to deliver the speech whilst wearing a pair of Skechers, I think, and a T-shirt, talking about a number 10 of the North. So that's not window dressing. He is passionate about the North as well, and I would expect to see stuff happen very, very quickly as well. And devolution, taking power out of Westminster and Whitehall. Some people said he can't make tough decisions. Some people said he likes to be liked, which I think does him a disservice as well. I looked at some of the headlines that came out on Saturday in the press. Okay, can you guess who said this? Which newspaper? Number one, Burnham vows to revive Labour. Who would you say?
Oh, to revive Labour. I would say the Times.
The Times. Okay,
Yeah.
1 out of 1. Okay.
Yeah.
The Burn supremacy. New PM seizes number 10 with no mandate. And that was a play on the words of the Born supremacy. Who would you think said that?
That's the Sun.
The Sun. Okay, 2 out of 2. Doesn't come easily out of your mouth or anybody else's in the North. Britain's new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, promises hope, but stays quiet on everything else.
Oh,
That's a tough one because that could be one of about 3
yeah,
papers.
that's the Eye, isn't
The
it?
Eye, yeah. They're quite clever like
Yeah,
that. Okay, Burnham to drag us back into the 1970s.
The Mail, the Express, or the Telegraph.
It could be any one of those. It was the Mail. And Andy's New Order. Burnham's dad danced to Manchester tune as he's crowned Labour leader.
That'll be Andy's favourite headline. Bit tongue-in-cheek. Star.
The Star, which goes to show that you spend far too much time looking at newspaper headlines. As somebody who's worked in the newspaper industry all my life, I mean, what those headlines, they tell you about 3 things. They tell you, 1, there is a lack of good sub-editors. Number 2, that newspapers don't report the news. They report their spin on the news as well.
Their opinion.
Yeah, their opinion as well. And it's a bit like watching a football match, and 2 different journalists watch it, and they both give a different take on the same game. So this presents a challenge in terms of how, Andy Burnham courts the media, because he's walking a political tightrope then. I'd hope he doesn't pay too much attention to seeing what the Daily Mail think of him, because he's never going to win that argument. Never going to win it.
No.
I think you look at the way he's used social media in the last 4 or 5 weeks. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a lot more announcements direct to the press. You said they should have a daily press conference.
Without doubt.
I think he's going to have at least weekly, maybe twice weekly as well. It might not always be him as well. And I just think, because that lends into what he said is going to be his core values, that he's going to do politics differently. In terms of business, he said last week, he will be a pro-business leader and a prime minister. He absolutely will be, because he was a pro-business mayor in Greater Manchester as well. Where do you see his priorities being from a business perspective, Frank?
I think all he'll want to indicate is that we've got a Labour government who actually wants to celebrate and support success, ambition, enterprise and entrepreneurship. And I think that, unfortunately, that early decision that Rachel Reeves made when she was Chancellor in a budget to hike national insurance costs by 2 pence for employers really basically said to businesses, you don't understand and you don't care about us. So I think he'll be trying to do something relatively quickly where he can mitigate against those changes that have currently taken place and which have damaged business. I wouldn't be surprised if he differentiated between what we would describe as the small and medium enterprises to big corporations. Maybe he'll bring different tax tiers in. Maybe he'll start to offer some incentives to small businesses to employ younger people. Maybe he'll give them some breaks on national insurance. I don't buy this idea that he's going to come in with a whole range of tax hikes, because actually what he said himself very clearly is that he is going to operate within the mandate that this Labour government was given. He may not have a personal mandate as far as the right-wing press are concerned, but we operate in a parliamentary democracy, and the Labour Party have got a mandate for the next 5 years. Nevertheless, he needs to be consonant of the manifesto. And so he's not going to be able to come in and say, right, I'm going to put people's taxes up to 80 pence in the pound, or I'm going to start to set this policy and that policy that are radically different from what Keir Starmer was going to do. What he is, though, going to be able to offer is hope, optimism. I think a narrative that gives people the expectation that things are moving in a particular direction, I think, for the better, and a plan. And that's what Starmer, unfortunately, was never able to deliver. And I think what he's also going to be able to do from a business perspective is point to the successes that he had when he was here in Greater Manchester of those strong public private sector partnerships. And I think he'll say to business, come with me on this journey. If we're going to nationalise things, we don't have to necessarily do that whereby the government owns 100% of an asset, but we can do it in partnership with you guys. If I'm going to transform social care in the National Health Service, I want to work with business to make sure that we can make that affordable and deliverable. So I think some of the messaging that you've seen from particularly the right wing press and perhaps some people from beyond the boundaries of the Northwest and the North of England will have this scepticism too. Andy Burnham is no more left wing a lunatic than I am. He's going to govern from the centre, probably the centre left, but he's very pragmatic. He's going to have a common sense approach to the issues that he's dealing with. And I think, as I say, as the first move in terms of basically improving people's view, not just of the Labour government, but of people's lives, he's going to create a better vibe. And that is important in politics.
I've got to make a couple of predictions, right? Okay, so number one prediction. Okay, he said that he's going to make tackling rough sleeping his first priority, his first thing. Okay, so what will happen is the right wing press will look at his record as mayor of GM. There'll be people out there now, photographers out there now, trying to get pictures of people sleeping rough in Manchester, and they'll say, "Oh, look at Andy Burnham." I mean, he said he made ending rough sleeping by 2020 one of his first priorities when he became mayor of Greater Manchester. And some people have said he's made a significant improvement. I think most people would say it, but he's not eradicated it. And I think he's had to be a bit more streetwise, pardon the pun, because this isn't something you can necessarily eradicate, okay? But you're going to get people talking about the fact that this is the streets of Manchester today on the day that he said he's going to eradicate rough sleeping. Thanks, Andy. And then people will read that headline, but they won't read the subtext of the story. I think if you look at what his priorities are, when he spoke about being in hock to the markets and stuff like that, you'll definitely see a change. I said on a previous episode of the Northern Spin, he would regret that. He absolutely would regret that. So I think he's going to try and keep the markets sweet. Building more houses. Labour made a policy of talking about building 1.5 million houses, 1.5 million houses. They never specified whether they're going to be council houses. I think you'll see that. You'll see that difference straight away. Defence. I make an early prediction that his summer is going to be so important to him because, like, the summer can be seen as a quiet season, and Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer made that mistake because they came into power the same time of year in July, and then basically said it's terrible. We've inherited a terrible situation, and everybody's mood went down. He's given an upbeat message, but a realistic message as well. But I think we'll see him go to Ukraine and see President Zelensky as well, so that he can show that the UK is in solidarity with Ukraine. He's already said things like over the weekend about energy and about his intent for new oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. Now, we've not seen his decision over the cabinet. There's a lot of speculation that Ed Miliband won't be the next chancellor as well. And part of the thinking behind that is this too closely associated with net zero hospitality. Right. Now, hospitality is quite a quick win. Hospitality, we know, has struggled, and I think it's quite a vocal sector as well. So if he can be seen to be getting hospitality on side, I think he can earn a lot of brownie points early doors as well. He's spoken about doing this tour of the UK as well. We're going to see the announcements coming out tomorrow, Tuesday as well. What do you think we can expect this summer from Andy Burnham?
Well, he's got a big agenda to get through, hasn't he? I mean, on the international stage, we talk about Andy Burnham not necessarily being that well known across the country beyond the boundaries of the Northwest. On the international stage, nobody knows him, nobody realises or recognises what to expect. So he's going to want to, I think, go and give Zelensky and our other allies some comfort that he supports the agenda set by Keir Starmer. There's not going to be any backtracking, backsliding as far as support for Ukraine and the allies are concerned. I'd love to be a fly on the wall when he has his first meeting with Donald Trump. we'll see when that is going to be. Maybe he'll invite him to the Hill Dicks and take him to an Everton game.
Yeah.
Let's wait and see. But I think that on a serious note, I think if there was a gap in Andy's CV in terms of preparing for Prime Minister, it would be foreign affairs
Yeah.
and the international agenda. So he's going to want to try and balance that somewhat, and it will mean him going abroad and doing some foreign trips. And people immediately might say, oh, well, he said he was going to be totally focused on the domestic agenda. Unfortunately, as Prime Minister, you can't be. You've got to get those international relations front and centre. And as I say, I think he'll be doing that over the summer. He's talked about this UK tour. That's going to be important, but it's going to be important not simply in terms of him going and seeing different places in different parts of the UK. It's also going to be important for him to be able to set the agenda. So expect some significant announcements during that tour too. So he's not going to just be going to Port Talbot to shake hands with steel workers for a photo op. He's going to be saying something about how his ideas for devolution can help those places in the future, what his welfare reforms will mean for people in that part of the world. And he will also be acutely aware that last summer, reform were allowed to totally dominate the political headlines, and therefore they set the agenda for months, not just during August last year. You've got Camp Face competing in this by-election with Farage. Andy Burnham will want to make sure that it's the Prime Minister that stays in the headlines, not some clown show that's going on in Clacton. So big announcements, very busy for him through the summer, through August, on the international stage and on the domestic front. And he's also going to be saying to the people he appoints to his cabinet today, cancel your holidays, guys, because we've got work to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just thinking that myself, actually. I was thinking he's never going to be so busy. It's fascinating. His wife, who has had a very low profile, let's be honest, when she was, when he was a GM mayor.
Yeah. Did you notice Frankie when he was trying
That's
to
his wife.
trying to persuade her to get on the photos when he finished his speech, just stood back.
Yeah.
She's just not comfortable with that. And why should she be?
Yeah.
She hasn't chose this life. She'd be very supportive of Andy. She's very bright. I'm sure she'll give him any advice if and when he asks. But she is not going to be one of those Prime Minister's wives that ever wants to be seen front and centre. She'll want to stay as much in the background as she can. And I thought that was very telling today, when usually, Prime Ministers have on the steps of Downing Street, arm round their spouse and photographs and the press corps getting all the pictures. Frankie sort of stood back and said no thanks and left Andy to take centre stage.
Yeah, I thought that myself, actually. I think what will happen is that if he comes in and he knows he can't make unfunded promises, he can't, because he'll get shot down in flames very, very quickly as well. But so he can't come out and say, well, we're going to sort out this problem of the fact there's a million needs, young people without work. But I think what you'll see is, in terms of maybe capping bus fares at £2, to be able to say to people, look, transport will not be an obstacle to you getting a job. It won't be an obstacle. Over the weekend, he spoke about scrapping digital ID cards, which was one of Keir Starmer's big suggestions. Now, you can see Keir Starmer's thinking is, I've got to get a policy announcement. I don't do Keir Starmer impressions or any other impressions, but, and everybody sort of, really? You've got all these things going on. I mean, David Blunkett's in favour of it, but he sort of recognised that actually, he's on a bus. He is on the Burnham bus, and he wants a clear focus on what his priorities are. And he doesn't want to be sidetracked by things like digital ID cards, which distract you away from the big issue, which is the cost of living crisis and everything else. And he wants his people on that bus. And if you're not with him, you're against him. And I think you'll see him have a very close-knit team around him. I think you're right. He's not going to, Port Talbot to shake hands and do a photo opportunity and talk about we all remember, Boris Johnson coming up to the northwest and talking about the Northern powerhouse and this, that, and the other, and then paying lip service to it for the rest of his time in office. You're not going to see that. I'm sure you're not going to see that with Andy Burnham, because he's laid out his mandate. He's put it out there. He's got an opportunity, and people will say he's got 6 to 8 months, a honeymoon. I think he's got 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And he knows that.
Yeah.
He knows that, and he's fought too hard to get this far as well. What we're going to do, we're going to break for part 1 of the Northern Spin podcast. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the other issues that are taking place across the north, and we might keep an eye on what's happening as well at 10 Downing Street. Welcome back to the Northern Spin podcast, sponsored by Sancus Lending UK. We spoke before the break about Andy Burnham being announced as the new Prime Minister. It's interesting. You're starting to getting some comments and some feedback about, how he's done, who's in the crowd. His mother, Eileen, was in the crowd outside 10 Downing Street as well. Chris Mason from the BBC said, you get a sense that Andy Burnham's desire is to project a big message on day one. I hadn't realised this, but this morning he was out at the crack of dawn meeting people who were rough sleeping, trying to show he is a grassroots pavement politician. Expect to see a video of that. I mean, the optics are really important, but I think you're starting to see a little bit of feedback, and so far, early days, positive. Let's talk about some of the issues across the north, because this is the Northern Spin podcast. On July the 30th, the Greater Manchester mayoral by-election will take place following the aforementioned Andy Burnham's resignation. 7 candidates on the ballot forms: Sian Astley of Reform UK, Geraldine Coggins of the Green Party, Bev Craig of Labour, Phil Eckersley of the Conservatives, Marcus Farmer, an Independent, Richard Kilpatrick of the Lib Dems, and Marlon West, Restore Britain. According to YouGov, Bev Craig is significantly ahead of Reform UK's Sian Astley, and the Greens' Geraldine Coggins is third on all metrics. Frank, I watched the Manchester Evening News' hustings with 6 of those candidates. The independent candidate wasn't there. I think it's fair to say that it's between Bev Craig and Sian Astley of Reform UK, and an outrider could be Geraldine Coggins. Can you see any way Bev Craig doesn't win that?
I can. People get complacent. A lot of people away on holiday. Low turnout, those are the things that are going to be keeping Bev Craig awake at night. She is undoubtedly the outstanding candidate who Greater Manchester voters have the choice from. So I would hope, both for Manchester's sake, the wider city region, but also I think for the future of the devolution agenda in this part of the world, that Bev does win. Other thing that you've got to say is she has a really close and productive relationship with Andy Burnham already. So I think I would almost be saying to people in Manchester, even if you're not a natural Labour supporter, surely you can see the sense of having an ally sat in Manchester as mayor, being able to pick the phone up to the Prime Minister and start to sort out some of the priorities in this part of the world. But as leader of Manchester City Council, you and I have worked with her closely, Chris. She's very, very bright. Again, understands and appreciates the importance of business and accepts the fact that these public-private sector partnerships are the way in which Manchester's been able to build the success over many decades. And I tell you the thing that I've been impressed with most as far as Bev is concerned, you often see new leaders come into a place and think, right, what I've got to do to make my mark on this new job is rip up some of the things or almost everything that the last person who went before me did. What Bev Craig did was she took Richard Leeser's legacy and she just developed it. And for that, I think she deserves huge credit. She's not the sort of show person that Andy Burnham is. But I tell you, she understands local government to its fingertips. She knows where the levers of power are. She's got a set of priorities which I think match the ambitions and aspirations of the people of Greater Manchester, and she will be a fantastic mayor. But she's not an absolute shoo-in because of the reasons I've given. And of course, what she's got to hope is that Andy's honeymoon does last beyond the next few weeks, because we're expecting surely a bit of a Burnham bounce for Labour. So she should get over the line. She should win. But I know, having once been a politician, that you never say that you've won until all the votes have been counted.
Yeah, I feel like I'm almost like just your sound piece because I say, oh, I'm agreeing with you again. There's a couple of things I would say about that is that I saw the hustings, right? Okay, if people want a super charismatic, huge personality like Andy Burnham, Bev Craig is not the person because she operates behind the scenes. And that's the way Manchester Salford City Council operates. She picked up on something, she run with it. She's very popular, hugely impressive, safe pair of hands, the grown up in the room. And but obviously she's the leader of Manchester City Council. She's not the leader of Rochdale. She's not the leader of Oldham, which we'll touch on fairly soon, or Bolton or Wigan or whatever. So one of the criticisms she's got is that Andy Burnham was the mayor of Greater Manchester, but he focused on the city centre. He would argue, quite rightly, I think that's not true. But clearly, Manchester's the attack brand for Greater Manchester. When I watched the hustings, I thought there's two things that they tried to pin on her. That's her opponents. One was Andy Burnham's relationship with the developers. So you look at the big skyscrapers in the middle of Manchester and they say, well, actually, where's the social housing with that? Okay, that's one thing. Open up your books, etc., etc. And the other one is what you're doing for the regions as well. I thought she did a couple of things well, which was if this election was held a month ago, say 2 months ago, before the story came out about Nigel £5 million Farage pocketing £5 million from a crypto billionaire, I think Reform UK would be in a much better position. They are hemorrhaging public support at a real rate of knots, and that could turn because politics is a short-term game. But that could turn. But right now, you would say you've got a leader who's going to be competing with a bin. In Clacton for an election that nobody else wants to get involved with other than 34 candidates, 32 independents. Yeah. So he's going to get no attention for that. Yeah. Okay. So you would say that Sian Ashley, Reform UK's candidate, has got one arm tied behind her back because the leader is damaged. Whether he's mortally damaged or not, we'll soon see. Okay, so that's going to work against that's going to work against her as well. I think in terms of the Greens, I mean, we saw Gorton and Denton. We saw the Green candidate win there as well. But the Polanski, the leader, his stock has dropped massively. As well. So I think people are looking at that and they're saying, not quite sure. So it's how good is Bev Craig and how bad are the opponents?
I think I'd slightly disagree with you in terms of a personality because I think when you're in a hosting situation as the front runner, it's always difficult to totally come across as yourself and just relax and speak to people in the way that you normally would. I know Bev well, so I know she's got a keen sense of humour. She's a big football supporter. A Man United fans, don't let that put you off if you're a City supporter. But she has got a great personality and she's really well liked among Manchester's political and business communities. But I think when you get to know Bev, the things that drive her are not actually dissimilar to the priorities that Andy Burnham's been talking about for many years now. And it's social inclusion. It's that inclusive growth agenda that I think it's fair to say Bev Craig has accelerated greatly since she became leader of Manchester City Council because she recognised she had inherited this booming city centre, but that had not necessarily had the ripple effect that they'd hoped in terms of getting some of that prosperity into the poorer areas of the city. And what she's done in her relatively short period of tenure is actually begin to address that. So I think she has got a keen sense of humour, as I say, good personality. Difficult to compare anyone with Andy Burnham because he's one of the most, if not the most, retail politician that we have in this country at the moment. But she will do a great job as mayor as long as she's elected on July the 30th.
And I should just clarify in terms of she has got a personality and she has got charisma. It's just if people expect her to be Andy Burnham Mark II, you're not going to be.
I think it's difficult to get that. It would be difficult to get that from anyone, wouldn't it?
Well, and she's been the leader for 5 years. There was one thing she said, though, which I really liked. So when the the Reform UK candidate, um, Sian Ashley, was being interviewed, and there was the first question that she got was about immigration, about Nigel Farage. You know what you describe as the obvious but the awkward question. And she said, "Sorry, I couldn't hear that from the table. Sorry, I couldn't hear that from the table. Could you repeat the question?" Like that, clearly stalling for time. And then when they asked her the same question, when they asked Bev Craig the same question, she said, "I could hear the question," like that. And it was just a withering put down
Yeah.
without being a withering put down. She doesn't descend like Andy Burnham, like, you know, who doesn't descend to personal attacks.
Yeah.
And she's had her fair share of personal attacks,
Oh,
which
some
is
of the stuff has been
disgusting.
disgusting.
It's
right?
absolutely disgusting. We're going to move out of Manchester. We've moved out of Manchester. They just said it couldn't be done, Frank. Big news in Lancashire last week, and I am a resident of Lancashire. The government's announced its decision on the local government reorganisation in the Red Rose County. Now, quick explainer. Under the plans, 4 new unitary councils will be created, replacing the 15 existing councils. The new unitary councils will cover North Lancashire, made up of Lancaster, Preston and Ribble Valley; West Lancashire, made up of Fylde, Wyre and Blackpool; East Lancashire, made up of Blackburn with Darwen, Hyndburn, Rosendale, Pendle and Burnley; and last but not least, South Lancashire, made up of Chorley, South Ribble and West Lancashire. And I live in the People's Republic of Chorley. This is massive news on lots of different levels. Ratchets up the pressure on Lancashire to agree to an elected mayor, given the whole thing about devolution. The various council leaders have reacted differently. No surprise that Reform's leader of Lancashire County Council, Stephen Atkinson, has said he felt the shake-up was just wrong. Whereas where I live, in Chorley, we've been seeing for years Chorley and South Ribble sharing services. So the idea of them working together with West Lancashire is actually just an extension of what they're already doing. You know this Lancashire really well. Why is it such an important decision, Frank?
Well, it's been behind the curve as far as devolution agenda is concerned, which is a shame because I think it was over 10 years ago that the Conservative leader of the County Council at the time, Jeff Driver, set up a shadow combined authority and was quite supportive of the idea of a mayor, elected mayor for Lancashire. So the fact that the county has now ended up behind some of its peers, including Cheshire and Warrington, it is really sad to see. I was, of course, a leader at Lancashire County Council, so take a keen interest in what's happening in the county. But what I would say is that I think, sadly, the government have got this wrong in terms of the local government reorganisation they've decided to go with in Lancashire. These new unitary authorities are going to have a huge set of additional responsibilities, not least things like children's care, social care, education. And I'm not sure that 3 councils such as Chorley, South Ribble and West Lancashire coming together have the capacity to deliver on those complex, expensive services. So my preferred option would probably have been to split the county in 2, to have 2 big unitaries that had that volume and capacity to deliver on those complex and challenging services. But ultimately, we still haven't got that final agreement from the politicians across the county. There's still this parochialism across Lancashire. It drives me absolutely mad. They've still not absolutely decided they're going to have an elected mayor. And whilst that's the case, then I'm afraid they are going to continue to be in the slow lane as far as investment and government support is concerned. So, although it's some progress, I felt as though it was sort of 2 steps forward and 3 steps back last week.
Yeah, it's interesting because there were 5 options on the table, and they've gone for this option as well. It does, you know, it does ratchet up the pressure in terms of devolution now, in terms of an elected mayor. I remember years ago they were talking about creating a, you know, retail centre to rival Liverpool One, which wasn't there at the time. And then it was going to be positioned in Preston. And then Blackpool said, we don't want it because it will take business away from us. And then Blackburn said, we don't want it because it will take shoppers away from us. So in the end, it took shoppers away from everywhere because they went down to Liverpool One, where they were welcomed with open arms as well. They are so fragmented, so fragmented. Easy for me to say in Lancashire as well. Another area I just want to talk about quickly is Oldham Council. So Lancashire's has got a very fragmented, I said it first time that time, political system. It's nothing compared to the chaos in Oldham Council, which is still to agree a council leader due to the ongoing political deadlock following May's local election. Labour's the biggest party with 18 seats, but it's a long way short of a majority. Reform are on 16 seats, and Oldham Group have got 10. Worse, it's a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about devolving power from Westminster, but Lancashire County Council has got reform-led. Is reform-led. You've got Oldham Council, which can't agree on a leader, and it's got the second biggest party is Reform. This is the big fly in the ointment, isn't it? It's embarrassing what's happening in Oldham.
Yeah, but it goes back to the point as to whether or not people take local government seriously enough. And when they're voting for politicians at local level, they tend to use it as their verdict on what's happening in Westminster rather than what's happening in their own locality. So greater devolution, greater responsibility, greater powers would hopefully give voters and electors the opportunity to say, well, we really need to know what these people who are standing for us as councillors are up to, rather than using the vote to decide what our verdict on what Andy Burnham and Kerry Badenoch are up to down in Westminster. The Oldham situation is chaotic. It's similar in Birmingham, but multi-party systems tend to throw up these anomalies. And again, it's not something he's been talking about over the last couple of weeks, but I think it's something that Andy Burnham will start to flesh out in future months and years. Electoral reform, because actually, if you had a more proportionate system, then you would have had a clearer result in Oldham, and people would be more minded to start to create coalitions and have conversations about how they could work together. I feel sorry for the Labour group and the Labour leader at Oldham, because I think that they've done, under really difficult circumstances, a good job. But you've got so many controversial issues now in that part of Greater Manchester that it's difficult to see any light at the end of the tunnel. Ultimately, what I think will happen, Chris, is commissioners will go in and end up running the authority, and that is not really a way in which you can progress your locality.
We saw what happened in Liverpool, didn't we?
Yeah.
And
for very different reasons.
For very, very different reasons, which we've not got time for.
Yeah.
Last one to ask you about is Liverpool, which is, we spoke about Steve Rotherham. Steve Rotherham, who probably one of the reasons he's looking so chipper isn't just the fact he's become a granddad, but sales of his book, Head North, which he co-wrote with Andy Burnham, must be going through the roof at the moment. He's made a few announcements, hasn't he, Steve Rotherham?
Yeah, not least the new Mayoral Development Corporation consultation out for that this moment in time. So this is the development of the North Dock in Liverpool, which also takes in part of Sefton, as well as the city of Liverpool. Seaforth, a bit of Bootle, which is where I was born, actually. And of course, the Everton Stadium, the Hill Dicks, is the catalyst for this opportunity for investment and regeneration. So that's big news. He's also announced that he's going to bring the trains back into public control. So following his mate Andy's...
Merseyrail?
Yeah, following his mate Andy's lead there in terms of public control. But it's going to be interesting to see what Steve does now, because there is this question mark as to whether he goes for a full term or not. I hope he does, because I think there's a lot of things that Steve has started that I'd like to see him finish and take the credit for.
2028, isn't it?
But you could understand that he may find that having grandchildren, having his mate in number 10, and I keep joking to him and calling him Lord Rotherham of Kirby.
Yeah,
he may have other things on his mind now.
Okay, we're going to finish with on manoeuvres, and literally going to keep it really short. The main reason being that every Labour MP has been on manoeuvres for the last 6 weeks as well. It'd be hard to pick one that hasn't been as well. But it would be remiss of me not to mention Count Binface, because he is...
what a man.
What a man. I mean, Lord Count Binface of Argyll. I keep an eye on his social media platforms, not just because of the fact he's amusing, but just because you look at where politics is, and that the Count Binface is he's a person for our time as well. This will be his 8th election. There are now 34 candidates in Clacton. And I bet you, beyond him and Nigel Farage, you can't name any of the other 32. Okay. Carol Vorderman has lent her support. Now, I'm not sure the bin can win, but I'm pretty sure that whatever happens, Nigel Farage ends up a loser.
Yeah.
Because if he wins with a reduced majority and a poor turnout, it reflects badly on him, and all the attention is on a bin, a novelty bin as well. I mean, he's clearly on manoeuvres. Do you see a place for Camp Bin Face in the Andy Burnham's future cabinet?
Probably not, but I tell you what, isn't it nice to have an intelligent sort of
novelty candidate?
Novelty candidate. That's the phrase I was looking for. Because he's got this side to him, this bit of a joke, Camp Bin Face, as you say. But when he's been up before the media and he's been asked questions, the first one, why should people vote for you? Well, I'm not Nigel Farage.
Best answer I've ever heard.
But then he made a really serious point, saying, look, even if Farage wins this by-election, or if Farage wins this by-election, there's going to be another one, and that's going to cost you about 400 grand. So vote for me, and you save £400,000. Yeah. So there's some quite clever messaging, around with that humorous approach that he's taken. But no, good luck to the guy. It'd be great to see Farage lose that by-election. Don't think he will, but I think he has given people food for thought as to how serious Farage and Reform are. And when you talk about people on manoeuvres, Robert Jenrick has been very high profile recently, hasn't he?
Very, very, yeah. So if Nigel Farage was to fall on his proverbial, then he would be the next cab on the rank. One would think.
I Andy think Byrne will be praying for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think in terms of Camp Bin Face as well, is that he understands the media, and when you're talking about a potential third or a second by-election, it's because Nigel Farage was being investigated by Parliament over that £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne as well. So that was the point he was making as well. But Peter Reid, who you name checked earlier, has being outside 10 Downing Street as Andy Burnham delivered his speech, massive Evertonian, has actually lent his support to Camp Bin Face as well. Come on, lad, he said. And Carragher also jumped on the bandwagon. Listen, that's all for today's episode of Northern Spin. It's been a moving feast. I've just looked at the BBC as well, and still no announcements on the cabinet. By the time this comes out, there almost certainly will be. Watching that with interest as well. Massive thank you to our sponsor, Sancus Lending UK, and to our producer, Dan Brown of Renowned, who's moved his diary around today to be able to accommodate us. We literally couldn't do this without Dan Brown and making sense of our ramblings as well. So thank you to him. If you've liked the podcast, please tell your friends and family. Give us a 5-star review. This is the Northern Spin podcast with myself, Chris Maguire, and Frank McKenna.